Better late than never, right? My plans for 2019 went sideways pretty hard. A good amount of time went towards playing Final Fantasy XIV in order to do a review on it, which was kind of a mistake considering the time investment. The holidays were also busier than I would have liked, and now I'm still getting over a real bad flu that has ruined my voice for the past several weeks. It's been a mess, but I'm hoping to hit 2020 much harder and get a lot more reviews done than I did last year. Best laid plans and all that, so we'll see how things go. As for this video, it's the same as the previous 2 times I've done it. It's not necessarily everything that came out in 2019, but I'll go over the best and the worst stuff that I covered that year, starting with film. Pure, distilled, absolute idiocy. Stupid characters, boring story. This movie is just straight up bewildering in its execution. The only reason to ever watch this is for the purpose of laughing at it, and even then, just don't bother. Similar to Wish Upon, Crawl can be awfully stupid as well. However, there is at least an alright story behind it, some decent acting, and a fair bit of legitimate thrills. If it would have stayed down to earth rather than get ridiculous during the second half, then I could see it being much better. But it ain't half bad for what it is. I'd give this a recommendation for most people. As usual, Stranger Things continues to be a safe bet, although I do feel as though the series is starting to wane. These characters and the world's lore is getting way out of hand. I am looking forward to Season 4, but not necessarily with high hopes. Regardless, it's still a good time, and this Russian dude was surprisingly great. Next up is the bottom 10 of video games, the worst games that I covered in 2019. An interesting take on the music and rhythm genre with an emphasis on versus play. Although without online multiplayer and the small song selection, the game's longevity is cut significantly. Still, not too bad for a budget title. I can see a couple of like-minded friends getting some mileage out of this one. A cute little story presented in a diorama style that makes good use of the virtual reality perspective. However, it's too short and too simple to be anything noteworthy. And that ending is downright terrible. It's like they didn't know how to finish it. It is competently made for the most part, but I wouldn't necessarily bother with this one. Lit is pretty cool and creative, although it's extremely short and simple and it has wonky controls to wrestle with. It's a neat little novelty, but one that doesn't grow past its initial concept in order to be something really special. Now we're getting into some junk. I was so looking forward to LA Noire because the idea of a AAA detective game sounded so cool, but the gameplay is boring and interrogating suspects is a complete guessing game. The atmosphere is so good, but they drop the ball on everything else. This is your typical Grand Theft Auto style game at its worst. Even worse than LA Noire, Death Stranding is by far one of the most disappointing AAA games I have ever played. There is no focus here whatsoever. The driving, combat, and stealth all control so differently and none of them complement each other. The worst part is that this could have been a cool game, but it's way too overambitious and has no idea what it wants to do with itself. Kojima is on real thin ice after this one. There is a little bit of creativity here and it looks nice, but it's still an extremely short and shallow game. Why would anyone sell this for money, let alone create a Kickstarter campaign for it? It would have been fine as a free game on PC, but not for the absurd price of $15. The music and sound effects are also terribly obnoxious. This is about the basest form of video game you can get, and it's wholly uninteresting. You try to sell me on what's basically a student project, and I am not gonna go easy on you. Put forth some creativity and effort next time, or put it up for free on itch.io. Don't charge money for this, even $3 is overdoing it. Visual novels can be nice when actual effort is put into them, but this isn't a good example of that. It can be comical at times, but I'm not sure how much of that is intentional. The puzzles are purely trial and error, and the game is far too short to be worth much value. The only thing that possibly makes this worth having is the conversation piece of having a game called Pantsu Hunter installed on your console. But hey, I've got Galgun for that. Another simple, no frills whatsoever kind of game, but with even less going on for it than Awesome P. There are several other games like this done better that are decades old, so Mushroom Quest is doing no one any favors. If it weren't for the atmosphere and somewhat well done presentation, then this game would be utterly worthless. Even then, there's no question that Agony is some absolute bottom of the barrel trash that is overpriced at any dollar amount. Horrible animations, ugly graphics, constant one-shot kill deaths that feel like gotcha moments, and just an overall terrible experience. If it weren't for the slight bit of effort that the development team put into this, then Agony would be on the same tier as Amy. But as far as the overall quality of the game goes, it's not far off at all. That's it for the bad news. Here's the top 10 games of 2019, as well as a couple that snuck into January 2020. I certainly wouldn't call this game great, but there is something about it that does appeal to me. A simple, slower paced game that's based around puzzles and exploration, and the level design is surprisingly good. If the combat were better, then this could have been something really special. But as it stands, it's just okay, and it could be interesting for some people. A poor man's Dark Souls, but not necessarily a bad one. It's got some really creative ideas that are held back by balance issues and janky animations. Still, it's a pretty fun game. If you've played the rest and you want something that's a little different, then Code Vein is worth checking out. Devil's Crush isn't as expansive as the more adventurous pinball games, nor is it nearly as well done as the many simulators available today. But for a single table with an insane aesthetic and that incredible soundtrack, it's a definite must-play for any pinball fan. This is what the vast majority of my time went towards in 2019, and the more I think about it, the more I regret it. MMOs are just way too much of a time sink, and there's a ton of other games I'd like to get around to. That being said, I do love this game quite a bit, and I wish I could go back and see where the story would be headed. Oh well, it is what it is. It'll be hard to say goodbye, but I've gotta set my priorities. Maybe I'll play it again during those free weeks they occasionally do. As for the game's actual quality, it's pretty good. The story is great, albeit with some ridiculous moments here and there. The music is unbelievably well done, and although the combat is simplistic, it's still very satisfying. If you don't mind playing basically just one game for an extended period of time, then I guess this one's not so bad. Only one new map, a new gimmicky mechanic, and way too many recycled monsters. Iceborne was a huge disappointment as an expansion, and yet, it's still Monster Hunter, and it's still awesome. I'm not feeling as strong of an attachment this time as I did with the base game. I mean, I saw the guiding lands and I'm like, no thanks. At this rate, I might skip out if they release another expansion. However, I don't regret my time with Iceborne in the slightest. Despite all the flaws, it's still a really fun game. I was about ready to write this one off, but my friends convinced me to give it another go, and I'm glad I did. I think this game has a rough start and doesn't do a great job at properly explaining its mechanics, but once you get it, man, it's a real good time. Compared to the competition, I don't think it's as adventurous as Sekiro, nor is the action as good as Devil May Cry. But this is still an excellent character action game through and through. Highly recommended. Revisiting this old favorite in time for the remake was a blast, and I can play this one anytime. However, if I'm trying to look at this objectively, there isn't a whole lot to it, and I don't believe the passage of time has treated it too well. It's frustrating if you don't know what you need to do, and way too easy if you do. Regardless, it's still undeniably one of the kings of the tank control survival horror genre, and anyone who's interested should give it a shot, if only to try out a genre that doesn't get too much love these days. It's also worth noting that out of all the classic Resident Evil games, I'd argue this one is the best place to start. Resident Evil 1 is kind of janky to get through, and Resident Evil 3 is far less forgiving. The Resident Evil 2 remake was equal parts disappointing and amazing. Some people might have hated the practically unkillable zombies, but I was okay with it once I got used to it. The combat is excellent, keeping the slow pace of the original along with some accessibility changes that doesn't make the game any easier. However, the Tyrant is incredibly obnoxious in this version. And worst of all, the A-B scenarios carried over from the original game were severely botched. The additional survivors modes were great, but where's my extreme battle mode? It really comes off as if the design team was cutting corners wherever they could. Even so, this is still an awesome game that is well worth playing. Just like Metal Gear Rising, this one took a while to get used to. But once you do, it's so good. Timing parries may be pretty easy, but it's still so much fun to do. And it's an amazing world to explore along with some absolutely fantastic boss fights. It could have been and should have been better, but I'll take what I can get. I had very little interest in this franchise initially, and holy hell have I been missing out. I can't believe it took me so long to get around to Devil May Cry 3, and Devil May Cry 5 is absolutely incredible. I'm not real happy with V as a playable character, nor with the select few of the monsters, but just about the entire rest of the game is stellar. Maybe it's a little lazy to bring back both Balrog and Cerberus again, but I think there are enough differences that I'm okay with it, and I'd say this game has the best hand-to-hand weapons in the franchise yet. A few too many flaws here and there keep it from being that near perfection 10 out of 10. It does make me wonder how I'd perceive the game differently if V just wasn't there. But I do appreciate Capcom trying something new, and once again, I'll take what I can get. Out of all the games I played in 2019, Devil May Cry 5 is by far my game of the year.
Guess who's getting their ass kicked?
Aside from how much of a piece of garbage Death Stranding turned out to be, I didn't expect so many exceptionally good games to come out this year. The three-hit punch of Resident Evil 2, Sekiro, and Devil May Cry 5 basically carried the whole year for me, while the expansions of Shadowbringers and Iceborne were solid continuations of their respective games. Due to my flu, I still haven't been able to record the audio for my reviews on Control or Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order, but that was another pair of 2019 games that really hit me by surprise. Expect reviews for those to come out sometime in 2020, as well as other upcoming games that loom on the horizon. I have extremely high expectations for Doom Eternal and the Resident Evil 3 remake, and I'm not entirely sure what to expect out of the Final Fantasy VII remake, but as always, I'm not holding back. I'll forever be fair and honest in my reviews, and I'll keep doing what I'm doing. Thanks for watching, and here's hoping that 2020 is at least as great, if not better.